The wind howled like a hungry wolf outside our small cabin. I was just a boy, but I remember the sound as if it were yesterday. Snow had been falling for 3 days and 3 nights without pause. It piled up against our door, reaching higher than my father's head. We were trapped. The world outside had vanished, replaced by a vast, silent blanket of white. My mother held my younger sister close, her face etched with a quiet worry that she tried to hide from us children. The fire in the hearth was our only sun, its flickering light dancing on the rough-hewn log walls of our home. We had food, but the question hung in the air, unspoken. How long would we have to make it last? This was the reality of winter on the American frontier. It was not a gentle season of festive cheer. It was a battle for survival. The cold was a relentless enemy, always searching for a way into our homes, into our bones. The isolation was a heavy cloak that settled over our small community, cutting us off from the world. Every day was a test of our strength, our ingenuity, and our will to see the spring again. The snow was beautiful, yes, but it was also a prison. It buried our paths, hid our landmarks, and silenced the familiar sounds of the forest. We were utterly alone, a tiny island of warmth and life in a frozen, unforgiving sea. My father would check our supplies each morning, his movements slow and deliberate. He counted the sacks of flour, the salted meat hanging from the rafters, and the precious bundles of firewood stacked beside the hearth. His face was a mask of calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. We all knew that our lives depended on these simple things. A miscalculation, a spoiled barrel of food, or a fire that went out could mean the difference between life and death. We learned to be frugal, to waste nothing. Every crumb of bread, every splinter of wood was a treasure. This was the harsh arithmetic of a frontier winter, a lesson taught by the biting wind and the deepening snow. The silence was the strangest part. During the summer, the forest was alive with noise, the chatter of birds, the rustle of animals in the undergrowth, the distant ring of an axe. But in the deep winter, a profound quiet descended. The snow muffled every sound, creating a world that felt empty and unreal. Sometimes the only thing you could hear was the beat of your own heart and the crackle of the fire. It was a silence that could feel peaceful at one moment and terrifying the next. It made you feel very small, a tiny spark of humanity against the immense and indifferent power of nature. Surviving such a winter was a skill passed down through generations. It was a form of knowledge just as important as knowing how to plant crops or hunt deer. In this essay you will learn how the early settlers faced these brutal seasons. We will look at the clever ways they built their homes to keep the cold at bay. We will explore the daily routines that gave structure to the long, dark days and kept despair from taking hold. The story of winter survival is not just about physical endurance. It is also about the strength of the human mind and the resilience of the family. It is a story of how people found ways to live and even to thrive in the most challenging of circumstances. We will journey inside the one-room cabins, the heart of the frontier family's world. Here, In these small, crowded spaces, life continued in the face of the storm. We will see how they managed the delicate balance of living so closely together, sharing every moment of fear and hope. The psychological challenges were immense. The endless waiting, the uncertainty of when the thaw would come, the constant gnawing anxiety, these were enemies as dangerous as the cold itself. We will examine the simple acts and quiet rituals that helped people maintain their sanity and their connection to one another through the long months of isolation. Furthermore, it is important to understand that not everyone experienced winter in the same way. There were stark differences between the lives of ordinary settlers and those of the wealthier class. For a family in a draughty, poorly supplied cabin, winter was a desperate struggle. For a merchant or landowner in a well-built house with plentiful supplies, it was a season of relative comfort and social gatherings. By comparing these experiences, we gain a more complete picture of frontier society. We see how class and wealth could profoundly alter one's relationship with the natural world, even in a place that seemed to be a great equalizer. Finally, we will reflect on what these stories of survival can teach us today. The world has changed in countless ways since the 1700s and 1800s. Our homes are warm, our food is plentiful, and we are connected to the world in ways the settlers could never have imagined. Yet the qualities that saw them through the winter, patience, resourcefulness, community, and the ability to endure hardship, remain profoundly relevant. Their story is a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience. It reminds us of a strength that lies within us all, waiting to be called upon when times are hard. The first line of defense against the winter was the cabin itself. These structures were marvels of simple, effective engineering, built from the very forest that surrounded them. Settlers would spend the autumn felling trees, choosing straight, sturdy logs of oak or pine. Each log was carefully notched at the ends, allowing them to fit together like pieces of a puzzle, creating strong, interlocking corners. This method, known as chinking, was crucial. The gaps between the logs were not just empty space. They were meticulously filled with a mixture of mud, moss, clay, and sometimes animal hair. This filling was the cabin's shield against the wind. Inside, the design was focused on one thing: conserving heat. The centerpiece of every cabin was the fireplace. It was not just for warmth, it was for cooking, for light, and for morale. These fireplaces were massive constructions of stone and clay, built to draw smoke up and out, while radiating as much heat as possible into the small room. A fire was kept burning day and night. Letting it go out was not an option. The family's survival depended on the constant hungry glow of the embers. At night, a log would be banked with ash to keep it smouldering slowly until morning, ensuring the heart of the home never grew cold. The placement of the cabin was also a critical decision. A wise settler would choose a spot sheltered from the fierce northwesterly winds, perhaps on the leeward side of a hill, or nestled in a thick grove of evergreen trees. They would also build near a reliable source of water, like a spring, that was less likely to freeze solid than a shallow creek. The windows were small and few, often covered not with glass, which was a rare luxury, but with greased paper or thin sheets of scraped animal hide. These materials let in a dim, murky light, but did a better job of keeping out the draughts than an open hole. Maintenance of the cabin was a constant chore during the winter months. The chinking would dry and crack in the cold, creating new pathways for the wind to enter. On days when the weather was calm enough, my father would go outside and inspect the walls, patching any cracks with fresh mud that he had kept from freezing inside. Snow had to be regularly shoveled away from the walls and the roof to prevent the weight from causing a collapse, and to reduce the dampness that could seep through the logs. The cabin was not a static object. It was a living shelter that required constant care and attention to protect the family within. The physical hardship of the frontier winter was immense, but the psychological toll was just as profound. The greatest challenge was often the waiting. Days bled into weeks and weeks into months with little change in the frozen landscape. The world shrank to the four walls of the cabin. The endless white outside and the perpetual twilight within could create a sense of timelessness, where the future seemed distant and uncertain. This feeling, known as cabin fever, was a real and dangerous affliction. It manifested as irritability, restlessness, and a deep, gnawing melancholy that could strain even the strongest of minds. To combat this mental fatigue, routine was essential. Each day was structured around a series of simple, repetitive tasks. For the men, this meant chopping wood, tending to any livestock huddled in a lean-to shelter, repairing tools, and maintaining the cabin. For the women, the days were filled with mending clothes, preparing food, spinning wool into yarn, and teaching the children. These tasks were more than just chores. They were anchors in a sea of unstructured time. They provided a sense of purpose and accomplishment, however small. They kept hands busy and minds focused, warding off the dangerous idleness that allowed despair to creep in. The lack of sunlight had a powerful effect on people's spirits. The sun, when it did appear, was low and weak, and the days were short. The long, dark evenings were spent huddled around the fire. This was a time for storytelling, for singing old songs, or for reading aloud from the family Bible if one was fortunate enough to own one. These activities were not mere entertainment. They were a vital way to connect with the world beyond the cabin walls. The stories reminded them of their history, of warmer times, and of the wider human community to which they still belonged, even in their profound isolation. Despite these efforts, the uncertainty was a constant companion. Every strange sound in the night, every shift in the wind, brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Was it a predator? Was the roof holding up against the snow? Would the food last? This low-level, persistent stress wore people down over time. They learned to live with a fear that was always just beneath the surface. The first sign of the spring thaw, the sound of dripping water from the eaves, the sight of a patch of bare earth, was therefore met with a sense of relief that is difficult for us to comprehend today. It was not just the end of winter, it was a release from a psychological prison. For months on end, the entire family lived, ate and slept in a single small room. This intense proximity was both a source of strength and, well, a potential cause of conflict. The shared space meant that warmth and resources were pooled efficiently. The body heat from several people helped to keep the small cabin warmer. The constant presence of others provided comfort and security against the fears that crept in during the long, dark nights. Children were never far from their parents' watchful eyes, and the family unit became a tight, self-reliant fortress against the harsh world outside. Everyone had a role to play, and everyone depended on each other. However, this lack of privacy created its own set of challenges. There was no escape from one another. Tempers could fray under the combined pressures of confinement, fear, and boredom. A crossword or a minor disagreement could quickly escalate in such a cramped environment. Parents had to become skilled diplomats, mediating disputes between siblings and finding ways to give each person a sense of their own space, even when none existed. They learned to read each other's moods, to know when to speak and when to remain silent. The survival of the family depended not just on their physical stores, but on their emotional reserves of patience and forgiveness. Activities had to be planned to keep everyone occupied, especially the children. With no room to run and play, their energy had to be channeled into quiet, productive tasks. Girls would learn to sew and knit, making and mending essential clothing. Boys would be taught how to carve simple tools or toys from scraps of wood, or how to repair a leather harness. These were not just pastimes. They were essential life skills being passed from one generation to the next. Education often took the form of practical instruction, with the cabin serving as a classroom and the parents as teachers. The winter in this way became a crucial period of training for the next generation of settlers. The evenings were the most important time for family bonding. With the day's chores complete, everyone would gather close to the fire. This was when stories were told, passing down family history and cultural traditions. It was a time for music, with a fiddle or a simple flute filling the small space with sound, a joyful defiance against the silence of the snow. These shared moments of creativity and connection reinforced their identity as a family. They reminded everyone that they were part of something larger than themselves, a unit bound together by love and mutual dependence, strong enough to withstand the long, cold night. It is a mistake to think that all frontier settlers endured the winter in the same way. Wealth and social standing created a vast gulf in experience. For the typical settler family like my own, winter was a time of austerity and constant vigilance. We lived in a small one-room log cabin, often with gaps in the chinking that let in persistent, icy draughts. Our food supply was monotonous and finite, consisting mainly of salted meat, cornmeal, and whatever root vegetables we had managed to store. Every day was a careful calculation of resources, a struggle to make what we had last until the spring. In stark contrast, a wealthy merchant, a successful landowner, or a government official experienced a very different kind of winter. They lived in larger, well-constructed houses, often with multiple rooms, and in some cases glass windows. Their homes might have had more than one fireplace, or even an early iron stove, which provided more efficient and consistent heat. These families had the means to lay in vast stores of supplies. Their cellars were filled with a variety of foods, barrels of flour, casks of wine, preserved fruits, and smoked hams. For them, winter was not a threat to survival, but an inconvenience to be weathered in comfort. The social life of the wealthy also continued, albeit in a modified form. While the poor were isolated in their cabins, the rich would hold gatherings and dinners. They would travel by sleigh to visit neighbours of a similar social standing, their paths cleared by servants. Their homes were centres of social activity, filled with music, conversation, and laughter. For them, winter was a season for reinforcing social bonds, for business discussions, and for courtship. The isolation that plagued the poor was for the rich simply a reason to draw their exclusive social circles even tighter. This disparity reveals a great deal about the structure of frontier society. The frontier is often romanticized as a place where all were equal, a land of opportunity for anyone willing to work hard. But the reality of winter shows that the old hierarchies of class and wealth were very much present. The cold was a harsh and impartial force of nature, but its effects were not felt equally. Your ability to survive, and certainly your ability to live comfortably, depended heavily on the resources you possessed before the first snowflake ever fell. Winter, in its quiet, brutal way, exposed the deep inequalities that lay beneath the surface of frontier life. If there is one virtue that the frontier winter taught above all others, it is patience. This was not a passive waiting, but an active, enduring strength. It was the patience to perform the same vital chores day after day without fail, knowing that your family's life depended on it. It was the patience to sit through the long, dark evenings, mending a sock by firelight, and to trust that the sun would eventually return. It was the patience to live with constant uncertainty, to manage fear, and to not give in to despair when the snow continued to fall. This was a deep, quiet resilience, born from necessity. This patience was woven into the fabric of daily life. Consider the act of preparing food. A meal was not a quick affair. It involved grinding corn by hand, slowly simmering a stew over the fire for hours to make tough meat tender, and carefully rationing every ingredient. Or consider the mending of clothes. A tear in a shirt was not a reason to discard it. It was a task that required time, a needle and thread, and a steady hand. These slow, deliberate actions taught a rhythm of life that is almost lost to us now. They cultivated a mindset that understood that good things take time, and that persistence is a powerful force. Patience was also required in dealing with one another. When a family is confined to a single room for months, the ability to overlook small annoyances, to forgive quickly, and to give others space becomes a critical survival skill. The settlers learned to have patience with their children's restlessness, with their spouses' anxieties, and with their own moments of weakness. They understood that their collective survival depended on maintaining harmony within the cabin's walls. This social patience, This willingness to put the needs of the group before one's own frustrations was a cornerstone of their endurance. This lesson in patience is one of the most profound legacies of the frontier experience. In our modern world, we are accustomed to speed and instant gratification. We become frustrated if a web page takes a few seconds to load, or if a journey takes longer than expected. The story of the settlers' winter reminds us that human beings are capable of a different way of being. They show us that there is a quiet strength in waiting, in enduring, and in trusting that the seasons will, in their own time, turn. Their patience was not a sign of weakness, but the very source of their incredible strength. As an old man, looking back from a world of warmth and convenience, I see the story of those winters as more than just a history lesson. It is a timeless reminder of what people are capable of when faced with true adversity. The world of the 1700s and 1800s is gone. The vast, untamed wilderness has been charted and settled. We no longer live in fear of being trapped by a snowstorm for months on end. Our modern lives are insulated from the raw power of nature in ways the settlers could never have imagined. Yet the echoes of their struggle can still be heard, and they have much to teach us. Their story is a powerful testament to human ingenuity and resourcefulness. They built their own shelters, found and preserved their own food, and created a life for themselves in a hostile environment, using only what they could find around them. This self-reliance stands in stark contrast to our own time, where we depend on complex global systems for our every need. The settlers remind us of the fundamental skills of survival and the importance of understanding our immediate environment. They show us that creativity is not just for artists. It is a vital tool for overcoming challenges. More than that, their experience highlights the fundamental importance of community and family. In their isolation, the settlers depended on each other completely. The family was the basic unit of survival, a small, tight-knit group that provided physical warmth, emotional support, and a shared sense of purpose. This deep reliance on one another is a powerful lesson for our modern, often individualistic society. It reminds us that our greatest strength is not found in standing alone, but in coming together, in sharing burdens, and in caring for those around us. Ultimately, the untold story of the frontier winter is a story of the human spirit. It shows us that beneath our modern comforts we still possess an ancient capacity for patience and endurance. The settlers faced the worst that nature could throw at them, and they survived. They waited through the darkness and the cold, holding on to the hope of spring. Their lives were hard, but they were filled with a quiet dignity and a profound strength. By remembering their story, we honour their struggle, and we remind ourselves of the resilient spirit that we, too, carry within us.